Welcome to another episode of the Heartland Author Podcast. I'm Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing Raegan Pietrucha, who has an extensive writing background and is the author of the upcoming book Head of a Gorgon. I'm here with Raegan Pietrucha. I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
Yeah, it's Pietrucha. The C is silent, but that's okay. It's a tricky one.
Okay. Author of the poetry collection Head of a Gorgon? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Raegan, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. So I am Raegan, and I write and I edit and I consult, and I do that on a professional and creative level. And yeah, I mean, basically that's just, it's kind of been my life. Even since I was a kid, I was really into reading, and then I got into writing in high school and college, and it's just kind of what I've done with this life of mine. Nothing super fancy, but it's been fun.
Without spoiling too much of your book, what is Head of a Gorgon? And I understand it's a poetry collection?
Yeah, so it's a poetry collection, but and it's shorter than a novel in verse, but you can kind of maybe think of it a little bit as maybe a novella in verse, from the perspective of it's got a chronology to it for the most part, and a narrative arc. So you can kind of understand, like a beginning, middle, and end sort of structure within the framework of Head of a Gorgon. And the story is a reimagining of the myth of Medusa and her tale of sexual violence within contemporary times, from a feminist perspective that gives voice to her as the main character.
Now, Head of a Gorgon, I saw on the website of the press, and I'll get into that a little bit later, was going to be sometime this month. Now, when is or was the release date of Head of a Gorgon?
So it's slated to release on the 17th. It's at the printer right now, so there is a possibility that it may, trickle out a little bit later. There are a lot of supply chain issues and whatnot, and of course, one never knows. Lots of projects at different presses all happening at once and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I do anticipate that it'll be sometime this month, if not the 17th specifically.
Okay, so no earlier than May 17th. Of course, supply chain issues have affected a lot of different industries over the past couple of years, including the book printing industry.
Oh yeah, big time. In fact, in some respects, I feel very fortunate that I chose poetry, because I'm part of different groups online, and it seems like the prose writers with like the hundreds and hundreds of pages in their books are the ones that are really, really getting kind of slammed and caught up in the whole thing, because obviously their books require a lot more paper than poetry collections. So in that respect, I feel lucky that, that I'm a poet.
Now, am I pronouncing Head of a Gorgon incorrectly?
No, that's correct. Head of a Gorgon.
That is correct. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's being printed by a company called Vegetarian Alcoholic Press, and that is the actual name of the company. Audience, please don't laugh. Is that company a traditional publishing house, a hybrid publishing house, or a vanity press?
It's traditional, although it is independent. So it's not vanity. I get royalties. I had no connection to the publisher prior to the book getting picked up, nor am I paying the publisher to publish the book. I'm getting royalties.
Yeah, so it's a traditional publishing through a smaller press.
Yeah, it's a small independent press, exactly.
Now, in 2015, you wrote an award-winning poetry chapbook titled An Animal I Can't Name, which, last time I checked, doesn't appear to be available for sale through any online retailers anymore. Now,
No,
without
it's
spoiling
it's
too much of that book, tell our listeners a little bit about An Animal I Can't Name.
Sure. So, An Animal I Can't Name is actually currently available for purchase through the Two of Cups press website. So, the original publisher's website, it's still there. People can visit that press and or purchase directly from the publisher, which is always ideal from a small press perspective to do anyway. But that came about actually as I was working on Head of a Gorgon. So the way that I reimagine the myth, usually when we enter the myth of Medusa, it's at her adulthood. And as I built out this story, I kind of wanted to flesh out a framework that imagined a childhood for this character, this mythic figure as well. So as I was writing these poems and bringing this sort of narrative together in this larger kind of broader perspective than we usually see in traditional retellings or even traditional tellings of the Medusa myth, I just kind of realized that there were certain chunks that could more or less stand on their own as their own sort of individual projects without not knowledge necessarily that this was a re-envisioning or part of an overall or larger re-envisioning of the myth of Medusa. And so what I did was I took some of those poems, and these are primarily the childhood poems, and I put them together in the chapbook, and I submitted it, and it won the Two of Press Cups contest. So that's how that came about.
Now, how many poems, individual poems, not poetry collections, have you written in your lifetime so far?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I guess it's hard to say. Like, if you want to talk about, drafts from like when I was, a kid or in high school that I never did anything with, or that are more or less like part of a diary or a notebook. I mean, there's no way that I never kept track. I mean, I would imagine in the hundreds, maybe the thousands, but, I finished poems that I actually sent out to be published are less than 50, I would say, that I sent out to be published through lit journals thus far. So, you generate a lot of material that ends up kind of going nowhere or just staying in your notebooks or on your computer as a writer, if you're a writer like me. And only a small fraction ends up kind of making it to that finish line of getting published in a journal and or being included in a larger project like a chapbook or a full-length collection.
Now, in addition to poetry, you've done a lot of professional writing work, including, but not limited to, writing work for the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. What types of work have you done for UNLV and or other clients?
Oh, wow. It really kind of covers the gamut. I mean, everything from social media posts to traditional articles like you would find in a magazine. I was an editor-in-chief over the research magazine at UNLV Innovation when I was in that role. Email marketing, newsletters, advertising, copy. It just really covers the gamut. I mean, those types of roles in a university really kind of, at least at UNLV, really kind of encapsulate the whole thing, which is unusual. You don't really see that in the private sector. You'll usually have divisions or specialties where, okay, this group of people focuses on social media content, this group of people focuses on the email marketing, this group of people focuses on, blogging, or if there's a print publication, producing content for the print publication. This group focuses on media relations, press releases, that kind of stuff. In my role as director of communications at UNLV prior, I was doing all of this stuff. I was involved in all of this stuff. So I've kind of dabbled in all of it. Although I will say, I think my strength was definitely more towards the magazine type of work. I had a few years of experience doing that prior. So that sort of felt and came more naturally to me than some of the other stuff. Although I was involved in the other stuff. I've also done, content marketing for other clients. I've written an ebook or two, related to specific products for clients, things like that. But resumes as well, that's been a separate thing that I've done and still do when I have the bandwidth. So it really just kind of covers a wide range. I tell people all the time, especially, people who kind of look at me as if I'm crazy when I tell them that I majored in English, that everybody needs a good writer. I mean, every industry. I've worked in a ton of different ones, from, legal industry to academia, traditional publishing, magazines and stuff, to healthcare. I mean, it just, everybody needs a good writer.
If you have a typical writing routine, what is a typical writing routine like for you?
Oh no, I don't actually. And I'm one of those people who kind of takes the approach of no way as the way. I'm fortunate because I'm the kind of person where I just sort of know about myself that if I want to do a project and I've kind of mentally committed myself to it, that no matter how much time it takes or where it kind of fits into my life, that it's going to get done at some point. So I don't work from the perspective of I need a routine to get it done. And that's been a benefit to me over the years, because I can kind of, when real life happens, and real life happens quite a bit, is an interruption to, a sort of writing regimen, quote unquote. I don't get too stressed out about it, because I know that I'm dedicated to my project, and that once this kind of thing has passed, I'm going to be able to come back to it. So as an example, in 2019, me and my fiance moved, and, obviously you're not going to sit there and adhere to some, prescribed writing routine when you're in the middle of a cross-country move. That's just not practical and realistic. Granted, kudos to people who can do that, but I'm not one of those. Like, I don't know how anybody does anything besides pack and get rid of a bunch of stuff and panic during a move. But, once the move was complete and I was settled in, then actually that was right around the time that the pandemic began, shortly thereafter. And then it was like, oh, well, this is actually in the writing regard, this actually kind of works, because it's not really safe to go out anywhere, nor do I want to. So, wow, I have just a ton of time to write. And so that's actually how I got about 18 chapters of the draft of my memoir in progress knocked out. And then at a certain point last year, during the PR for work that I've been doing for Head of a Gorgon, it was like, okay, I need to step away from focusing on that writing and come back to, focusing my energy on something else, namely the promotion of my poetry collection. That happened, that focus sort of shifted for me around October, November. And so I've been focusing on that up through now. But then once the book is out, then I know that I'm going to have this time where I can refocus, maybe a few hours each weekend. I can start refocusing some of my energy back on drafting the memoir. So that's the kind of writer I am. I know I'm committed to a project. Things come up, and my energy and has to be sort of directed towards those things. But once those things are kind of knocked out, then I know I'm just going to come right back to it, and I fit it in as I can. So for me, with my current work schedule, it's just a matter of, okay, couple couple hours, or maybe a whole day, maybe even two if I'm lucky, on a weekend, and I just draft, and that will be how that goes until the next other thing that demands my attention and energy that's higher priority comes up.
Yeah, and I'm sort of like you in a way, actually, because while there's many authors that try to maintain a strict routine, I really can't, because I have and this interview is being recorded on Mother's Day, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I am going to acknowledge my mother uh, on here. She is not in the best of health. She's had back problems for many years, and I spend quite a bit of time of the day taking care of her. So I basically write whenever I can.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
usually around when I have to take care of my mother.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to sort of adapt to things, I mean, somebody else's life, especially if it's your mother, is generally higher priority than your writing, which is not to say, I mean, writers love writing. Not saying it's not important, but just saying that, some things are just going to be more important and demand more of your time and energy, especially at particular times in your life. And that's okay. Like, again, it's okay if you are the kind of writer who can still manage to have a routine. That's fine too. I'm not criticizing either side. Just simply saying that, for a lot of us, we have other obligations that are, that will come and go as higher priority. But, when they do, they just have to be addressed, and that it is what it is.
Now, if I read your website correctly, you're currently writing a memoir. Is that correct?
Right.
Now, as a writer, what is the hardest adjustment for you when it comes to going from writing poetry to writing a nonfiction book?
You know, I think I'm sort of in the middle of finding that out, to be totally honest. Um, it's funny because I've written prose professionally, for so many years now, but it's not quite the same thing. There are some elements that sort of carry over. You want to sort of keep it lively, keep it fresh, vary your sentence lengths, etc., etc. Just general overall good tips and rules for writing, engaging prose. But it really is quite different, to sort of shift from poetry and really go into nonfiction. And because I'm still in the drafting phase, like I said, it's kind of hard for me to say what some of the overall lessons are going to be as far as the shift goes, because I'm not quite there yet. I'm sort of just like, okay, well, I'm back in prose, just like I was doing professionally, and again, carrying some of those skills and lessons over. I also have a background in fiction. That was actually my first focus in undergrad before I shifted to poetry in graduate school. So I mean, I know I'm aware of the craft elements. All of these things are things that I've studied, but like for example, when you're writing an article and you insert a quote, it's very different than inserting or having dialogue. And I actually love dialogue, and I feel that it was one of my strengths when I was writing fiction. Um, so being able to sort of bring that back, and there's actually some dialogue poems in dialogue in Head of a Gorgon, but even that it's different. I mean, it's just different because it's poetry. Um, So being able to kind of re-engage with some of these elements that just more or less don't exist or exist in the same way in poetry has been refreshing, but also it's like, oh yeah, like I'm getting back into this and just kind of getting my feet wet again. Um, I guess, I'll know more about the shift once I'm really in the revision process, because I think that's when sort of these stark differences are really going to come to light. Right now, it's just kind of vomited all on the page, and then the cleanup crew is when I really have to sort of um, rethink and retool, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, now this is going to be my last question. What is the best advice you can give to people who are going into poetry for the first time?
I guess I would just say, sort of just as much as you can. I think it's about balance. The balance between being open to the journey and to sort of others' feedback on your work, but then being able to try to balance that with knowing that some of that feedback isn't probably going to like be right for your work or helpful to your work, which is hard because especially as a poet, when you're starting out, you don't really know your aesthetic and you don't yet have your distinct voice. And maybe like, I don't know, would I say I have a distinct voice? I mean, I think so, but I'm open to that journey, right? Where that changes that and that evolves. I mean, I know the voice for Head of a Gorgon because it's a project I've been working on and off for more than a decade. I know what the story is now. I've been on that journey. But as you're just starting out, you may not necessarily have that sense of what your aesthetic is or what your voice is or will be or how it might evolve. And so it's sort of important to be able to listen to feedback. And some of that feedback comes through the way that you engage with reading, what you're reading on the page. And how you kind of react to that. You may really like something, you may not like something, and that's all very informative and educational. As an artist, you can kind of say, okay, well, why am I sort of bristling against this approach or this craft element? What is it that I don't like about that? That can be just as informative as, wow, I really do like this, and maybe I want to incorporate some of this into my work or my voice. But just being able to kind of be open to hearing it all, but then sort of setting aside the things that really don't resonate with you or really don't kind of advance your goals as a writer and your purpose as a writer. A lot of people will come along and they'll give you feedback that, and I think they come mostly with good intentions where they're trying to help you grow and learn as a writer, but that may be taking you more in the direction that they want to go as a writer, and that's not necessarily really going to be helpful to you, especially if the direction that they want to go as a writer and are trying to kind of move you along in is not the direction that you want to go. So just kind of being aware, I guess. Just be aware that these are things that happen along the journey to all of us, and that it's okay. And that you don't have to take every little piece of advice to heart or, incorporate it into your work or what your voice ultimately becomes. But that it's good to be kind of open and aware that there are these many, many perspectives. It's a very, very subjective art. And that, you're gonna find your way by sort of taking it all in and then leaving behind what just doesn't really resonate.
And your advice is very helpful because I'm even though I self-published one book back in 2019, I'm still really trying to find myself as an author as I'm working on different writing projects and different types of writing projects. And writing has been much more of a learning experience for me than I could have ever imagined.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I think that's one of the best parts of it. Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries.
Okay, well, Raegan, this will conclude the interview, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author podcast. I apologize for mispronouncing your name at the beginning.
That's okay. No worries. Like I said, and after 40 plus years on this earth, you get used to that. So no worries. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it, Aaron.
You're welcome. I enjoyed interviewing Raegan, and I wish her well with Head of a Gorgon and her memoir. I had a bit of an ear infection on the day when I recorded the interview, but I am feeling better today. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at authoraac.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter at authoraac. You can also watch videos on the Heartland Author channel on YouTube. Copyright 2022, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of its audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.